Carbohydrates are an essential component of nutritious diet and an integral part of every menu. They can make an everyday meal special and create varied and unique menu items. Nutrient-dense carbohydrates such as fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains are rich in vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber and fuel the body with optimal energy. It is essential for chefs to understand the nutritional profile of carbohydrates as well as proper techniques for preparation. A carbohydrate is an energy providing nutrient in the form of sugar, starch, or dietary fiber and is the main source of energy for the body. Carbohydrates supply the body with an ideal form of fuel. For example, the brain and central nervous system rely solely on carbohydrates for energy and cannot function properly without them. Carbohydrates also play a role in digestion and metabolizing other nutrients in order to ensure that the energy needs of the body are met. Carbohydrates, commonly abbreviated as Ch4, are made from the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Because carbohydrates contain carbon, they are classified as an organic compound. In the process of photosynthesis, leaves absorb carbon dioxide from the air, which contributes carbon and oxygen to the plant. The root of the plant absorbs water, which adds hydrogen and oxygen. When they combine, these elements create carbohydrates, which provide energy for the plant growth and repair. Humans and animals are incapable of making carbohydrates. Therefore, they rely on plant sources to supply the carbohydrates necessary to meet their energy needs. Although plant-based foods are the primary source of carbohydrates, a significant amount of carbohydrates are also found in milk and some milk products. A monosaccharide is a simple carbohydrate made of one sugar unit. Monosaccharides are considered the simplest form of sugar and are sometimes called the building blocks of carbohydrates. There are three types of monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose, also known as dextrose, is a monosaccharide that is the primary source of energy in plants and animals. Fructose is a monosaccharide that is the sweetest of all sugars. And galactose is a monosaccharide that is most often attached to glucose to form lactose, which is milk sugar. A disaccharide, also known as a double sugar, is a simple carbohydrate made of two attached sugar units. Disaccharides contain glucose in combination with itself or in combination with fructose or galactose. Disaccharides must be broken down during digestion into the monosaccharides, glucose, before they can absorb and be used for energy. Disaccharides include sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Sucrose is a disaccharide composed of glucose and fructose. Lactose, also known as milk sugar, is a disaccharide comprised of glucose and galactose. Maltose, also known as malt sugar, is a disaccharide comprised of two units of glucose. A polysaccharide is a complex carbohydrate with a chain usually consisting of hundreds to thousands of sugar units. Polysaccharides are classified as starches and dietary fiber. A starch is a polysaccharide made by plants to store long chains of glucose molecules. Dietary fiber is an indigestible form of carbohydrate found in vegetables, fruits, and grains. A starch is a polysaccharide made by plants to store long chains of glucose molecules. After energy needs are met for growth and repair, plants store extra glucose in the form of starch. Amylose is an insoluble component of starch that forms an unbranched chain. Amylopectin is a soluble component of starch that forms a branched chain. Amylose typically comprises 20 to 30% of the total structure of starch, while the remaining 70 to 80% of starch is comprised of amylopectin. Starches such as potato starch are high in amylopectin and are effective thickening agents. Starches with lower percentage of amylopectin, such as cornstarch, form a firmer gel and are less effective thickening agents. Dietary fiber is an indigestible form of carbohydrate found in vegetables, fruits, and grains. Dietary fiber consists of long polysaccharide chains of glucose and lignin. Most complex carbohydrates contain two types of dietary fiber: soluble and insoluble. Soluble fiber is a dietary fiber that dissolves in water. Soluble fiber helps slow digestion. Insoluble fiber is a dietary fiber that does not dissolve in water. Cellulose is an insoluble fiber that is the main component of plant cell walls. Cellulose gives plants strength and rigidity for proper growth and is easily seen on the stalks of celery and kernels of corn. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. The main function of carbohydrates is to supply the body with energy. Carbohydrates contribute 4 calories of energy per gram and are the preferred energy source over proteins and lipids. For example, when proteins are used for fuel, vital functions that rely on proteins cannot be performed. Therefore, carbohydrates are sometimes described as protein sparing. Protein sparing is the process by which carbohydrates and lipids supply energy so that the main functions of proteins can be fulfilled. Although skeletal muscles can use lipids for energy, the brain and the central nervous system cannot. Thus, carbohydrates are a crucial energy source for all cells. Glucose is the only form of carbohydrate that the body can use for energy. This requires that all digestible forms of simple and complex carbohydrates be converted to glucose for energy use. Because complex carbohydrates are digested more slowly than simple carbohydrates, they can provide the body with a steady flow of energy. Although the main purpose of carbohydrates is to supply energy, carbohydrates are vital nutrients involved in many essential body functions. For example, carbohydrates do the following. They help regulate blood glucose levels to supply needed energy to cells while maintaining a 24-hour reserve of energy. They help eliminate unwanted materials from the body. They provide nutrients for bacteria in the large intestine. They supply raw materials used to build compounds such as amino acids. They affect the structure and functions of proteins. They influence communication among cells. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. The consumption of carbohydrates is vital in order to supply the body with energy. However, carbohydrates from food cannot provide energy until they are broken down into their most basic form, which is glucose. Carbohydrates need to be broken down into monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, or galactose, in order to be absorbed through the cells that line the small intestine. The liver converts fructose and galactose to glucose, which is sent to the cells to be used for energy, stored by the liver and muscles as glycogen, or converted to fat. Glycogen is a polysaccharide made and used by the liver and muscles to store long chains of glucose. The amount of glucose used as energy or stored as glycogen is regulated by the hormone insulin. Insulin is a hormone produced by the pancreas that is necessary for regulating blood sugar levels. Because complex carbohydrates contain long chains of sugar, they take longer to digest and absorb than simple carbohydrates. In the small intestine, complex carbohydrates are broken down into disaccharides and smaller polysaccharides. Enzymes continue to split disaccharides into monosaccharides that can be transported to the liver for conversion to glucose. Polysaccharides are broken into disaccharides and eventually into monosaccharides for absorption. Dietary fiber moves from the small intestine to the large intestine. And dietary fiber cannot be broken down by enzymes and is most likely excreted as waste. However, some bacteria found in the large intestine digest a portion of soluble fiber through the process of fermentation. Fermentation is the breakdown of carbohydrates due to the actions of bacteria, microorganisms, or yeast. Because it is a viscous material, soluble fiber is easily fermented by the bacteria in the small intestine. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. When glucose is used as energy, enzymes split the bonds between the 6 carbon atoms in the glucose molecule. This split results in 2 fragments, each with 3 carbons. A 3-carbon fragment can attach to another 3-carbon fragment to form glucose and provide energy to cells. The 3-carbon fragments can also be further broken down. When carbon fragments are further broken down, chemical reactions generate heat and ATP. ATP molecules capture energy to fuel the cellular activity. In the presence of oxygen, glucose is converted to energy to yield heat, ATP, water, and carbon dioxide, which is a waste product. In red blood cells, which do not contain oxygen, the conversion of glucose to energy yields heat, ATP, and lactic acid. Lactic acid is a type of organic colorless acid made by red blood cells and muscle tissue. When carbohydrates are consumed and broken down into glucose, The pancreas releases insulin. Insulin acts as a messenger to cells and tissues to take up excess glucose so that it can be stored as glycogen. Glycogen is primarily stored in the liver and muscles. The brain also stores a tiny amount of glycogen to protect the body in times of severe carbohydrate deprivation. The majority of the glycogen produced is stored and used only by the muscles. The remaining glycogen is collected in the liver and dispersed to the tissues of the body and the brain where energy needs are needed. Blood glucose levels are maintained when the body receives an adequate supply of carbohydrates at regular intervals throughout the day. When blood glucose levels drop, an individual may feel faint or weak. However, the body tries to protect itself from low glucose levels by storing glucose as glycogen. When glucose levels fall, the pancreas secretes a hormone called glycogen. Glycogen is a pancreatic hormone sent to the liver to trigger the conversion of glycogen to glucose for energy. When the liver and the muscles have reached their storage capacity for glycogen, the glucose is still circulating throughout the body. Excess glucose is burned for energy. When this situation occurs, excess lipids are stored in the body tissue as fat. The liver also breaks the excess glucose into components that are constructed into lipids to be released into the blood and stored as fat. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and milk provide a natural source for simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Most adults require a minimum of 130 grams of carbohydrates daily. Simple carbohydrates have a sweet flavor and occur naturally in foods such as fruits, agave nectar, honey, molasses, maple syrup, and milk. In addition to naturally occurring sugars, food manufacturers often use sugar replacers and artificial sweeteners to provide a sweet flavor in food. An added sugar is any sugar not naturally occurring in a food and added during processing or preparation. Sugars are often added to foods to heighten sweetness, promote browning in baked goods, and increase shelf life. Added sugars provide calories but little nutrients, so they are considered empty calories. Processed foods can be a significant source of empty calories. If the ingredient list contains items that end in ose, O-S-E, such as sucrose, maltose, dextrose, fructose, or lactose, then they are products, then the product contains added sugar. Cane sugar, brown sugar, honey, molasses, nectars, corn syrup, and high fructose corn syrup are also added sugars found on ingredients lists. High fructose corn syrup, HFCS, is a corn syrup that has been treated with an enzyme to convert part of its glucose to fructose. The conversion of glucose to fructose yields a very sweet product that is inexpensive to produce. This makes high fructose corn syrup an attractive ingredient for food manufacturers and contributes to its wide use in beverages, baked goods, fruit spreads, syrups, and candies. Stevia is also added to foods to make them sweeter. Stevia is a natural sweetener derived from a plant native to South America. Stevia is often mistakenly considered an artificial sweetener because it is intensely sweet, 300 times sweeter than sucrose, and has no calories. Sugar replacer also known as a sugar sugar alcohol or polyol is a naturally occurring carbohydrate that is only partially digestible and has a chemical structure that resembles both sugar and alcohol. Sugar replacers are typically less sweet than sucrose, which is granulated sugar, and provide 2 to 3 calories of energy per gram versus the typical carbohydrates at 4 calories per gram. Because sugar replacers are only partially digested and absorbed, they provide less energy and have less impact on blood glucose levels. In addition to being low in calories, sugar replacers help food stay moist, prevent browning, and do not promote tooth decay. An artificial sweetener is an intensely sweet, non-nutritive synthetic substance with 0 to almost no calories. Artificial sweeteners are considered non-nutritive because they are not absorbed by the body and do not contribute nutrients. 6 types of artificial sweeteners have FDA approval. These include avantamine, neotame, saccharin, sucralose, and ACE-K, and aspartame. Complex carbohydrates are mainly found in vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains. The body prefers complex carbohydrates because they take longer to digest. As a result, glucose is released slowly and evenly in the bloodstream. Complex carbohydrates are also a source of dietary fiber. Most foods high in dietary fiber contain a combination of soluble and insoluble fiber. Rich sources of soluble fiber include broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kidney beans, barley, and oat bran. Fruits such as apples, prunes, and citrus fruits also contain a significant amount of soluble fiber. Like soluble fiber, insoluble fiber is present in a variety of vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. A kernel of grain is composed of a husk, bran, endosperm, and germ. A husk, also known as a hull, is, is the inedible protective outer covering of grain. A bran is the tough outer layer of grain that covers the endosperm. While it's often removed during processing, bran provides necessary dietary fiber, complex carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. An endosperm is the largest component of the grain kernel and consists of carbohydrates and small amount of protein. It is milled to produce flours and other grain products. A germ is the smallest part of a grain kernel, and consists and contains a small amount of natural oils as well as vitamins and minerals. A whole grain is a grain that has only had the husk removed. Because the germ and the bran remain intact, whole grains may require more time to cook than processed grains. Whole grains are rich in dietary fiber, low in fat, and contain vitamins, minerals, and some protein. Consuming whole grains instead of refined grains has been shown to improve cardiovascular and digestive health, lower the risk of cancer, reduce cholesterol, and promote stable blood glucose levels. A refined grain is a grain that has been processed to remove the bran, germ, or both. Refined grains are easier to digest, have a longer shelf life, and take less time to cook. Processing often goes beyond removing the husk and can include removing the nutrient-rich bran and germ. The bran is removed from all-purpose flour to make the product white in color instead of brown. Removing the germ can help preserve the product so that it does not spoil quickly. However, grains lose vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber during processing. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. Research indicates that most individuals consume an adequate amount of carbohydrates, but are lacking in fiber-rich, complex carbohydrates. For example, an individual who consumes a 12-ounce can of soda typically takes in 35 grams of carbohydrates and 140 calories. However, the soda lacks nutrients, and therefore the simple carbohydrates in soda provide the body with nothing more than empty calories and short-term energy. Vegetables, fruits, grains, milk, and milk products contribute to carbohydrate intake. With the exception of milk, complex carbohydrates also provide dietary fiber to the diet. Nutrient-dense, fiber-rich, complex carbohydrates provide the body with optimal energy throughout the day. According to the Institute of Medicine, a healthy diet consisting of approximately 45 to 65% carbohydrates helps ensure that the energy needs are met without causing proteins to be burned as energy. The recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, for carbohydrates is a minimum of 130 grams per day and includes sugars and starches, but not dietary fiber. This RDA was established to ensure that enough glucose reaches the brain for proper functioning. The adequate intakes, or AIs, for dietary fiber are based on 14 grams of dietary fiber per 1,000 calories consumed. Fiber-rich foods have been found to help with weight management and may reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, colon cancers, and digestive disorders. Fiber-rich foods are associated with a lower incidence of colon cancer because dietary fiber promotes regularity, which reduces the time that potentially harmful substances remain in the colon. When carbohydrates with added sugars and empty calories are consumed in excessive amounts, individuals may be at greater risk for obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and tooth decay. Obesity is the result of eating more calories than the body uses. Because foods and beverages with added sugars are often high in both saturated fats and calories, there can be a greater tendency to gain weight when those foods are consumed often. Diabetes is characterized by abnormal blood glucose levels and insufficient or ineffective insulin production. The glycemic index, GI, is a measure indicating the rate in which an ingested food causes blood sugar levels to rise. Studies have found that diets high in fructose and sucrose can increase cholesterol levels, which in turn can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. When dietary fiber was added to the diet on a consistent basis, the risk of contracting cardiovascular disease was found to decrease. Tooth decay, also known as dental caries, is a condition in which teeth decay due to acids produced by bacterial growth and improper dental care. When a sugar is consumed, bacteria feed on the simple carbohydrates and produce acids, which destroy tooth enamel and give bacteria a location to attach and multiply. An insufficient amount of carbohydrates can lead to hypoglycemia and ketosis. Hypoglycemia is a condition that results from low blood glucose levels. Hypoglycemia most often affects individuals with diabetes who have taken in too much insulin, have had too much exercise, or have not eaten enough. Symptoms of hypoglycemia may include dizziness, weakness, sweating, shaking, anxiety, and difficult with speech. Ketosis is a condition in which ketones build up in the body because lipids are improperly metabolized for energy. Ketosis can cause the blood to become too acidic, which can be fatal in severe cases. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. Although they both add texture and flavor to dishes, simple and complex carbohydrates often function differently during food preparation. For example, simple carbohydrates or sugars promote moisture retention, caramelization, preservation, crystallization, and fermentation. In contrast, complex carbohydrates or starches are more commonly used as thickening agents. Carbohydrates are hygroscopic, which means they absorb moisture from the air. Hygroscopic properties are desirable for some foods because the food retains moisture and stays fresher longer. However, other foods must be stored in airtight containers to prevent the absorption of moisture and preserve texture. Light affects carbohydrates through photosynthesis. This is especially important in the storage of potatoes. Potatoes should always be stored in a dark, cool location because sunlight begins the process of photosynthesis. If potatoes undergo photosynthesis, they will begin to turn green and eventually develop a toxic compound called solanine. Solanine is a bitter, poisonous alkaloid that most commonly develops in potatoes and tomatoes. If heat is applied to carbohydrates, caramelization, the Maillard reaction, dehydration, crystallization, and fermentation can occur. Dehydration is the process of removing moisture from food. Dehydration is an effective way to preserve food and can be accomplished using low heat. When exposed to heat, sugars will begin to brown and caramelize. Caramelizing foods enhance color and add sweetness, a sweet flavor to the foods. Sugars brown as a result of the Maillard reaction. When the proteins and the sugars in food are exposed to heat and merge to form a brown exterior surface. Crystallization is the process in which crystals precipitate from a solution to form a solid in the presence of heat. Candy making is based on this principle. A supersaturated solution is a solution in which a substance has been dissolved into another substance in an amount greater than what is usually possible as a result of the substances being heated and cooled. Supersaturated solutions of sugar and water are unstable. As a result of being unstable, the sugar molecules begin to crystallize into a solid. Temperature control is essential to the fermentation process for both baking and making alcohols. In baking, fermentation is accomplished by using yeast to convert sugars into carbon dioxide and alcohol. Fermentation is also essential in making wine, beer, and spirits. Gelatinization occurs when heated starch granules absorb moisture and swell, which thickens liquids and adds structure to baked products. When starch granules undergo gelatinization, their hydrogen bonds break, which allows water to enter the starch granules and causes them to swell. Starch granules can swell up to 30 times their original size, which makes starch an effective thickening agent. Flours, cornstarch, arrowroot, and tapioca are starches commonly used as thickeners. Retrogradation is a process in which a gelatinized starch causes a thickened liquid to turn into a gel as it cools. If retrogradation is not desired, the product can usually be restored to an ideal viscosity by applying gentle heat. Hydrolysis is the process of splitting a substance into smaller parts by the addition of water. Enzymes, acids, and heat can be used to help speed the process of hydrolysis. When it is hydrolyzed, a polysaccharide or disaccharide is broken down into simpler sugars. For example, sucrose is often hydrolyzed to yield the two monosaccharides that combine to form it, which are glucose and fructose. The end result is a very sweet product known as invert sugar syrup, which is commonly used in baking to help maintain moisture and inhibit crystallization. Vegetables high in chlorophyll, such as broccoli, will turn a drab green color but retain their firmness when an acidic ingredient is added to the cooking liquid. Adding an alkali will cause green vegetables to become brighter in color but mushy in texture. Neither acidic nor alkaline ingredients affect the color of carotenoids. However, an alkali will cause orange and yellow vegetables to become mushy. Acidic ingredients cause purple and dark red vegetables to turn bright red. In contrast, alkaline ingredients cause purple and dark red vegetables to turn blue and white vegetables to turn yellow. In addition, alkaline ingredients cause a mushy texture in purple, dark red, and white vegetables. Acids can also affect the gelatinization of starches. When acidic ingredients are used in pie fillings, barbecue sauces, or glazes, modified starches are often used to help maintain the desired viscosity. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test. Carbohydrates can be the basis for a smooth and silky pureed soup without the need to add cream or the focal point of a healthy entree such as a whole grain pasta dish. When carbohydrates are served as an accompaniment to a protein such as meat, poultry, or seafood, their complementary flavorings and contrasting textures can be heightened. Food costs can often be reduced by increasing the amount of carbohydrates on the plate while reducing the portion size of protein. Fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes are typically low at cost, which is a significant consideration when analyzing food costs. Nutrient-dense carbohydrates come in an assortment of stunning colors, textures, and flavors, giving chefs the opportunity to take advantage of their versatility. For example, an array of grilled vegetables with vivid colors and variety of textures can be a flavorful and nutritious start to any meal. Carbohydrates are often cooked to enhance their innate characteristics and improve digestibility. Carbohydrates offer a range of textures and flavors from soft to sweet to firm to crisp. For example, sauteing broccoli with garlic infused oil and lightly season it with salt and pepper not only preserves the appealing crisp texture of broccoli, but also develops flavor and makes the broccoli easier to digest. Appetizers, salads, sides, entrees, and desserts can showcase nutrient-dense carbohydrates by highlighting their many colors, textures, and flavors. Carbohydrates can be used to offer guests nutritious and innovative menu choices that complement any cuisine. Focus on these questions to prepare for the test.